Press Secretary Sean Spicer is now out after just 180 days on the job, which, in case you're checking, is actually a very short time for a press secretary. It's one of the shortest, although not the shortest tenures in history. So he will be leaving. The Times reported it this morning, saying that Trump tried to keep him on, but that Anthony Scaramucci being brought into the administration was the line in the sand that Sean Spicer just could not abide, and so he would be leaving his position.
Right, he said it was a major mistake, Spicer.
A major mistake, yes. All of the rest of the stuff was fine. Don't worry about that. But the Scaramucci, it can't be abided. Now remember that earlier, the former White House communications director Mike Dubke resigned back in May, didn't specify why. We don't know if it was Scaramucci related necessarily. But we did want to memorialize a little bit. Ben and I have been talking about, the media loves these sorts of staff shakeups, and I don't care too much about what it necessarily represents for Trump, although it does, and we'll get into it a little bit. Mostly it's that we have a lot of memories of Sean Spicer, sure. And so we're gonna look back over a few of those here.
Someone as despicable as Hitler, who didn't even sink to using chemical weapons.
Do you think people should be concerned that the president posted somewhat of an incoherent tweet last night?
The president and a small group of people know exactly what he meant.
Quote, Hitler didn't even sink to the level of using chemical weapons. What did you mean by that?
He brought him into the Holocaust Center. I understand that, but I'm saying in the way that Assad used them, where he went into towns, dropped them down to innocent into the middle of towns. It was brought.
Speaker Ryan today said there's no evidence. The National Association of Secretaries of State say that they don't agree with the president's assessment. What evidence do you have?
As I said, I think the president has believed that for a while. I think anybody who undermines the success of that rage owes an apology and a disservice to the life of Chief Owens.
Is that your message to Senator John McCain?
That's my message to anybody. I think Mr. Acosta owes the president-elect and frankly the entire press corps an apology for his childish and inappropriate behavior. President Obama went outside the chain of command. He didn't use the NSA, he didn't use the CIA, he didn't use the FBI, and he didn't use the Department of Justice. He used GCHQ. What is that? It's the initials for the British intelligence spying agency. That it was, wiretapping. That spans a whole host of surveillance types of options. I think some people are clearly upset, but there is a bit of professional protester manufactured base in there. The president used the word wiretap in quotes to mean broadly surveillance and other activities. That is absolutely not true. There are no dossiers being kept. Just a binder that I put right here. That's about it. That was a joke. Photographs of the inaugural proceedings were intentionally framed in a way, in one particular tweet, to minimize the enormous support that had gathered on the National Mall. I think through a lot of the actions and statements that he's going to make, I think the contributions of Frederick Douglass will become more and more. Kristen, all of this space was full when the president took the oath of office. And to make sure that if they are a 5-year-old, that maybe they're with their parents and they don't pose a threat. But to assume that just because of someone's age or gender or whatever, that they don't pose a threat would be misguided and wrong. This audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
Yeah. So Spicer fighting back against all of those who will give a pass to 5-year-olds and assume that they can't kill someone if they want to.
I don't want to. Certainly, I'm not one to.
Thank you, JR, for putting that together.
Yeah, nice job.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, period. Yeah, that was great. That suit didn't even remotely fit.
No, that was
the 21st.
That early on.
And Trump had criticized him for his suits. It's a big one for appearances.
It would have. Yeah. So this is a generic media criticism, not a particularly hostile one. But there is a Sean Spicer will now get credit because he took a stand and left because there was something that he literally could not stand for, the hiring of a non-professional in a job that requires a professional. And Sean Spicer had a low-level job in the Bush-Cheney administration, then worked, I guess, for the Republican National Committee during the campaign. I don't think he was a professional either, but this is a job for a grown-up, and it's not. And I'd be curious, Mark, you think that Scaramucci, because he's at ease in front of the camera and he has a charm to him that Sean Spicer lacks, but I don't know whether he'll do briefings that he'll help. I doubt
believe
it.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders is supposed to be right there.
Well, she got promoted. She's going to be the press secretary now, right? Yeah. So, but I bet he's a gargantuan failure at this job.
Now, two things to say. First of all, to Ben's point, on Twitter today, it was all alive with thank you, Sean Spicer, for finally having a backbone, for finally drawing the line. The reason Sean Spicer's gone is a political reason, because he lost a spot in the White House that he'd wanted. It's something, it was completely administrative. It has nothing to do with principle. It has nothing to do with anything that matters. It only has to do with his own career. So that's first of all.
Yeah.
Secondly, yes, Ben, I think this guy, Scaramucci, who reminds me of Ben Affleck in Boiler Room. You know, he's got that kind of loud mouth, perfectly put together, you know, cufflinks that match type crap. Things that matter to Trump.
Do people wear cufflinks that don't match?
Well, you're right. It's,
yeah, if you can only afford one at a particular time.
I meant the cufflinks that match the shoes. Or the
I got you.
Not the I gotta break it all down.
He's got shoes that match too.
Shoes that match too. This guy is Trumpian, and Trump will love that his message is getting represented strongly. So you're right. Is in some sense, is this the answer for Trump? Not necessarily, but in terms of getting his message out, is what I'm getting at. He cares about how, although I don't know what his message is.
I think Trump has gotten his message out. His message is incoherent drivel. He's one of the, he's in the top 400 dumbest successful people in the history of the United States. And
400.
So, and successful because he was born with money and he did what, he created some more money.
And he failed a bunch, but not enough to lose all of it.
That's right. So I think his message gets out very clearly. On a regular,
I mean, recraft his message so it's palatable. That's what I mean. You're absolutely right. His message changes by the hour. I don't think he even knows what his message is.
So I want to go through a couple other elements of this, because
just let me say quickly that again, because that this is a job for a professional image creator, and he isn't one.
Yes.
And it is once again Trump putting someone who can't do this job. I'm not saying Anthony Scaramucci isn't a bright guy. He may be an incredibly bright guy. A lot of bright people can't do this job, and he'll be one of them. That's my prediction.
Exactly. Yeah, and look, let's not forget that throughout the 6 months, Donald Trump has attacked Spicer for his clothing, his hygiene, his weight. I mean, there was the jokes.
Weight.
Yeah, actually, that's a good one. But he did, and obviously the fact that jokes were being made about him constantly. Like Trump would occasionally say he gets good ratings, but you know he doesn't like being the butt of jokes. And having Melissa McCarthy do constant impersonations, they didn't like that. A couple things we didn't have in the montage, because it focused mostly on the bad things he said, were some of the ridiculous things he did. He hid in a bush once. I don't know if you remember that. That was a funny little moment. And he used the term Holocaust centers. So he was a goofball, and even Donald Trump was able to see that. Now, it's not just Sean Spicer that was frustrated with Scaramucci coming in, though, although I agree with what you said about why he was leaving. Maggie Haberman of the New York Times tweeted this: Reince Priebus furious per multiple who spoke with him. He has tried blocking Scaramucci at various points.
Scaramucci's been, this is the third or fourth, at least the third
thing
job
that they've considered.
Right,
yeah.
Trade representative and
export import bank,
export bank or export import bank. I don't know which one goes first.
I don't know. They're both
probably
good.
Import. Usually import.
And so Priebus told the AP,
gotta bring it in before you send it out.
That's a great demand. Priebus told the AP that Scaramucci was very good friends with him and that he supports the president's choice 100%, going on to say, it's all good here in the White House.
Yeah, I bet he was like, it's all good here.
Yeah.
So Reince Priebus, he won't have a job in the fall. At the bare minimum, that would be my guess.
We've thought that many times in the past.
I got you, but here's a direct, we know this was a loss of power. They made a play, he's tried to block him in the past. This is a big job, head of the messaging. Spicer left, and so I get, my hunch is that Priebus won't be long for this job either. I would just like to quote The Nation. I have a whole bunch of things to say about Sean Spicer. I wanted to, because he'll get praised for standing on principle, as Mark said. There's no principle. John Nichols in The Nation today called Sean Spicer a paid perjurer. I don't think I could do better than that. He made this job a joke. He did terrible things. If he'd been principled in any way, he would have resigned. Again, to sort of paraphrase John Nichols, he would have resigned on day one when Trump sent him out there to lie about what happened on the inauguration and the day after with the crowd, with the march. So, or the whatever, a couple days after, whatever it was. So, I mean, this guy's failure at this job was epic and unparalleled. And the notion that now he sort of did the right thing, he was a laughingstock at the job, and my hunch, but I bet he'll show up somewhere, whether it's Fox News or CNN, and he'll get a book deal, and you know, just the mere nature of his leaving makes people interested in him and will elevate his status. So from Sean Spicer's point of view, probably the right move. And before he started, you know, everybody was like, hey man, Sean, he's a good guy. He's one of us. But you saw what happens. You work for Trump, all of a sudden, nothing, all that stuff, he's one of us, good guy, respects the press. Nope, nope, nope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say on the laughingstock thing, because I thought that same thing when he left. Literally, I just thought, well, the guy's a laughingstock. Anything that they do in that role is better than that. But what I see is the administration closing behind these attack dogs like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and I think Scaramucci falls into that same category to the extent that you're going to see him on camera. I mean, you see the legal team that shows up on cable television. This is what Trump respects: those attack dogs that show up on television and make the president's points, whatever the hell they're. He saw
Scaramucci. The reason Scaramucci has this job, the reason Trump liked, because you know, as we know, as we're about to play, Scaramucci was not an early Trump supporter and was very critical of him. But then come later, Trump loved how he handled himself and defended Trump on cable TV on Fox, and Trump was like, that guy, I like that guy. That's what he cares about.
I want him on my team.
Right.
If you like this clip of the Young Turks, you know there's a whole live 2-hour show, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern every day, and you can download it or stream it and watch it without ads if you become a member. tytnetwork.com/join.